AP Live with European History. My name is Todd Beach. I teach AP European History at Eastview High School in Apple Valley, Minnesota. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful day in Minneapolis. And this is Katie.
Good morning. I'm Katie Lancey. I teach AP Euro at Coral Gables Senior High. It's in a suburb of Miami, Florida. The sun is shining here, but it's pretty hot here today. So I think you probably have a little bit of a nicer day than we do, Todd.
Well, that doesn't happen very often, probably.
You're right.
It's DBQ Friday. That's very exciting. So we better get started with this. Hey, here's our learning at a glance for this month that we have for it's almost a month, I suppose, leading up into the 13th. So here we are on the 24th. It's DBQ Friday, DBQ practice. Our content review is going to be on industrialization and its effects. And then we certainly want you to join us on Monday because that's when we're going to unpack all the different score points from the DBQ that you write for us and give you samples and everything else. Then we have one more week of review and then another DBQ practice on May 1st. And then this extra week, the College Board has added, and we are going to go over feedback, practice, and then more feedback and some celebrations, some exciting celebrations for you on the 8th. And then the 13th is your exam day.
Awesome. So again, today is our DBQ practice day, and we are going to be covering pretty much a quick overview of industrialization and its effects. So we're really excited about another full DBQ for you over this weekend. And Todd is going to go through more specifics here on our next slide.
All right, our lesson overview for today. We're going to contextualize the Industrial Revolution, what brought us into that, the spread of industry throughout Europe. There'll be a brief information about second wave industrialization and effects, and then what are the social effects of industrialization. Here are our learning objectives and the thinking skills and the reasoning development for today. You can pause the slides here if you want to read through those, but we'll get straight into the warm-up with Katie.
All right, great. So yesterday I asked you to take a look at this document by Lord Byron, and I gave you a structure that you could use in order to do attribution, give a very brief description of the document, hap the sources we've been talking about, and then my bad, I asked you at the very end to conclude with the document number, which I did not provide to you. So some of you made up document numbers, some of you did a little parentheses with a question mark in it. That is totally my fault. This is not a document from an old DBQ, and I should have put one at the top. So I did include 3 samples that don't have that at the end, but please know that's just not required. It is a best practice, and that is my fault. So I apologize for that. I should have put a document number up at the top. So let's get in and we'll take a look at some examples of people who did a really nice job. This is Iris from Paul VI High School in New Jersey. And Iris starts off with, in a speech to the House of Lords, Lord Byron expressed his emotions and opinions on the Frame Breaking Act. Speaking to an audience of his fellow Parliament members, he tried to explain to them that there were only negative reactions of the people to industrialization, because industrialization was truly an evil to the people. The Frame Breaking Act had been passed to punish textile workers who rebelled, but they only destroyed the mechanized looms because their jobs were threatened, and that was in the document. The growth of industrialization during this time had caused an increase in mechanized labor and machines, leading to less need for human labor. So the people felt threatened by industrialization because they could possibly lose their jobs. It's a little hint there at a historical situation. But then really clearly in the green, Iris goes into speaking from the point of view of an English Romantic poet and member of Parliament. Lord Byron does not hold back on his emotions, clearly showing his anger at the passage of the Frame Breaking Act. And then if you can see in the yellow, there's that Y in our hap and happy. This is important. Even though he is a government member, he makes his feelings known, understanding that the feelings of the majority are important. His speech shows his revolt against Enlightenment's restraint by expressing his intuition and emotion, even if his opinions may be different from the other Parliament members. Really nice. I would say so many of you who sent in your responses saw that there was a point of view for him being a Romantic poet and responding to this industrialization. So you did a really nice job with that, Iris. Thank you. And then this one's much shorter, but still I think does the job. And I want to remind you that so many of you have expressed to us in your emails your concern about the time in the exam. And so while that was really excellently done, it doesn't have to be quite that long. If we see, this is Marissa from Riverside High School in Florida, uh, and starts with that attribution we've been asking you to start with. In a speech to the House of Lords, Lord Byron is rallying against the Frame Breaking Act after workers have vandalized mechanized looms. His purpose is to speak passionately about how he clearly believes that the act should not be passed, and to show that the Luddites were desperate and should be seen in that light. He is hoping that his members of parliament will see their plight and not pass the bill. That's the purpose in this speech. This is important because it shows that not everyone in the House of Lords was indifferent to the situation unfolding in England, and that Byron himself was against the effects of industrialization. So this is a lot shorter than our last one, but I think it does a really nice job in the yellow of doing that why and happy, and moves on then to discuss the document as a whole. It's really a nice job by Marissa. And then our last one is back to, so many of you did really nice point of view, so I wanted to show another one. This is Joe at Graham High School in Virginia. And Joe starts off, same with that attribution, we really like that. In a speech to the House of Lords in 1812, Lord Byron argued against the Frame Breaking Act because he believed the workers who destroyed the mechanized looms that threatened their jobs were justified in their actions. Now we move to the green. We're moving to that point of view analysis. Byron, who was a romantic poet himself, made this speech during Britain's Romantic movement, which emphasized the supremacy of nature and emotions over the strict empiricism and rationalization of the Enlightenment prior. Additionally, the Romantic movement vilified industrialization, which Romantics interpreted it as threatening the harmony of nature. Moves on to the yellow, to that why. This is important because the ideas of this movement shaped Byron's opinions regarding this incident and ultimately led him to side with the workers rather than the textile industry. So another really nice example of someone who looked at that document by Lord Byron and then really thought about what was in the source and how the information provided to you in the source brought that document to light. So very nice job on these student responses. We really appreciated all the responses that we got. You guys are doing such a great job.
Great. Thank you, Katie, for breaking that down for everybody. That looked good, everybody. I think we're getting there, getting ready for May 13th. We'll start with the Industrial Revolution and contextualizing it. And I was hoping this map would show up fairly big. It looks like it's going to be sufficient. So the Industrial Revolution begins in Great Britain. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, why there? Why when it did? Why did it occur when it did? And why Great Britain? And that's part of the contextualization. So it occurs between 1780 and 1850. It grows out of the long process of development, actually. Different things that help cause Industrial Revolution, Scientific Revolution, and Enlightenment fostered this new worldview. We embrace progress, the role of research and experimentation, trying to understand and master the natural world. Britain also, as we ask about why Britain, Britain has a really vibrant scientific and Enlightenment culture. It included the British Royal Society of Arts, which sponsored prizes for innovations in machinery, and it allowed British industrialists to exploit the latest findings of scientists and technicians from other countries. So these cash awards that were being set out for different things. I mean, like Benjamin Harrison was a clockmaker who figured out how to make a clock so that ships could tell longitude while at sea. These types of things were put out by the British Royal Society. And so these big monetary awards, that's obviously a motivating factor. And then D, by the 18th century, the expanding Atlantic economy and trade with India and China served Britain remarkably well. So we have money, capital coming into Great Britain. The mercantilist colonial empire Britain aggressively built, with a strong position in Latin America and the African slave trade, provided lots of raw materials, such as cotton, and a growing market for British goods. So we have opportunity because there are raw materials, and we have a manufacturing sector that's kind of been put out from the cottage industry that's kind of grown from that rural industry. And so everything's kind of ripe for some type of movement or change. And then in F, English farmers were continually adopting new methods of farming. Increasing productivity meant a bounty of crops, low food prices, which means people have money to spend on goods. So that kind of brings us into the Industrial Revolution with contextualization. Take a look at the map real quick. This source, over 60% of industry in these areas. So really, really heavy. You can see kind of a cut up of that, Lancashire and Yorkshire mill towns there. You can also see Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland are also important with that. So the map kind of gives you an idea. The other thing about England as we talk about this, because it's an island nation, because it has lots of rivers as well, and canals have been built, you're never more than 20 miles anywhere in England from navigable water. That means you can move goods around pretty quickly. And so that also kind of has a stimulant for the Industrial Revolution. So we know it's going to begin in Great Britain. We have this source here, James Watt, who's a Scotsman, studying improvements to the Newcomen steam engine, which we'll talk about there. So nice image there. European society, like others, continue to rely mainly on wood for energy. So it's really a question of energy. What kind of energy do we have to do the things we're doing? And at this point, we could burn wood, we have people power, and we have animal power, and that's about it. And then, so Britain, because it's an island country, is starting to run out of wood, and they start to look toward coal as an alternative to increasingly scarce supplies. And they start to use coal to produce mechanical energy and to power machinery. The thing about coal is it's in the ground, and you have to dig it out. And when you're an island nation and you're digging coal out and the climate is rather rainy, you have water in your coal mines a lot. And so the first engines were made by Savory and Newcomen in these years, and they were to pump water out of the coal mines. Well, as the story goes, one of the coal mine pumps broke, and a man named James Watt, who was a professor in Glasgow at the time, came out and tried to take it apart, and he noticed that if we add a separate condenser to the engine, we can capture some of this bled off steam and increase the efficiency in the power. And so thus, the coal burning steam engine, Industrial Revolution's most fundamental advance in technology, is born out of Watt's mind. So production of iron increases, it becomes the cheap and indispensable building block of the economy. And then we take that and we start to make things other than pumps, and we put it on a railroad car. And the first steam locomotive went between Liverpool and Manchester. In 1829, it was Stephenson's rocket, and it sped down the track at a whopping 16 miles an hour. And I always tell students, you could probably run 16 miles an hour, but could you be hauling something behind you for 30 miles at that pace? Railroad dramatically reduced the cost of shipping. Larger markets encourage larger factories. We have a strong demand. And now, also in England, we have this unskilled labor force. Remember, it's landless rural workers because of enclosure movement, and they are looking for work. So we have this growing class of urban workers because they move from the rural world into more of the urban world. Take a look at the source here on the right. This is the great exhibition, the Crystal Palace, made of glass and iron in 1851. It looks like, kind of a modern day mall. I would imagine it would get hot in there, I would think, but all that glass. 1851, London hosted an industrial fair called the Great Exhibition, the newly built Crystal Palace, a gigantic exhibition hall made entirely of glass and iron, draws millions of visitors, and they are now called the workshop of the world. Britain, by 1860, they are producing a remarkable 20% of the entire world's output of industrial goods, whereas in 1750, that was only 2%. So that's quite an increase for Great Britain.
Absolutely. So, and then after Great Britain, we are going to see, even though they are leading the way, we are going to see it spread outside of Great Britain. And so there are strong independent governments in Western Europe. And we want to make the distinction that Western Europe is a difference here, that are going to try to mimic Britain's industrial successes. And the state, unlike in Great Britain, where really there's a lot of laissez-faire competition, the state is going to be a power that is going to promote industrialization. We're also going to see that countries are going to implement tariff protection in order to support their own economies and industries. So we will see that there will be large tariffs put on imports in order to have people buy stuff from their own countries. So on the continent, we're going to see businesses adopt factory technology fairly slowly. In France, the demand for luxury goods is still going to be there. France has a niche market for these luxury goods, things like silks and scarves, and they're still very, very in demand. They don't have as much reserves of iron and coal, and so they'll have fewer and smaller industrialized cities. And because of that, less of the negative social effects that I'm going to talk about in a little while that are suffered by Great Britain. And in the German states, remember, we don't have a Germany yet, but we do have the Zollverein, which is this customs union And it is led by the big part of the German states, which is Prussia, and we'll come to that later. And they are going to start sort of a loose economic integration with this customs union that will eliminate tariffs between member states and enact a single tariff outside of this customs union. So by 1834, Prussia does have rich coal and iron deposits, and it is going to start industrialize. The Ruhr Valley will become a center of iron production, and by 1850, Prussia is going to be mining over 6 million tons of coal per year to support its railroads and its manufacturing. And there's a picture on the right there at the end of the 19th century of factories that if you looked at a rendering of Manchester, you might see a very similar looking picture there. However, there are places in the D paragraph that we're going to talk about. Much of Western Europe has industrialized, but there are some areas that lag behind. So some of Southern Europe, particularly like Spain, is going to have relatively unchanged life there. Industry is going to come slowly in the 20th century. And then in Russia, we're going to see Russia does industrialize, but Russia still has serfdom. Their continued reliance on serfdom is going to mean that its economy is going to still be mostly agricultural. It does industrialize later in the century. It will build railroads such as the Trans-Siberian Railroad that goes from Moscow all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And its coal, iron, and steel industries will develop at the beginning of the 20th century, but they're later, right? Even as we're on the cusp of World War I, we're going to see that they're still mostly agricultural.
Great, thank you, Katie. By the time we get to 1870, historians call what they call a second wave of industrialization and its effects. And essentially, we're moving from steam power, which steam power, make no mistake, will stay around to the beginning of the 20th century. It'll still be very, very much used. But we're starting to find new sources of energy. And so these new sources, mechanized industries are going to expand. New industries will appear because they're going to appear around new sources of energy and new products from that sources of energy. And industry spreads geographically. Part of that was something known as the Bessemer process, which when I was thinking about the image, I was looking at images of the Bessemer process and I thought, oh, we could show this, but then realizing I don't know how that really works. I'm going to put up an image and try to explain something I don't know how it works. So you can certainly Google Bessemer process and look at different diagrams of how that works, but I've never worked in a steel mill, so I'm not going to pretend that I have. The Bessemer process was introduced leading to the manufacture of steel. Now, historians are really careful here to explain that this similar process had already been in place in China since the 11th century. But what they have done is they've created this process that's a slightly different, but it's done on such a massive scale that we're producing huge loads of steel at a time. And because it can be done on such a massive scale, it can be done relatively cheaply. So these improvements were made to the steam engine, making it more efficient, making it power larger and larger ships, for example. Go back. But electricity is also beginning to come into use. The invention of gasoline and diesel engines will eventually give the world automobiles, airplanes, new methods of shipping in the decades before 1914. And then this always just fascinates me, the transatlantic telegraph cable. And that's the source. They're going to lay a cable in, you think about telegraph as a wire, and they're going to lay a telegraph wire cable encased in rubber on the sea floor that extends from parts of Europe or in Ireland all the way to North America. So this illustration shows one of the ships that's laying out this Atlantic cable. And I just still find that such a fascinating thing that they could do that. And I can't even imagine the number of spools of this cable that had to be aboard these ships to make this happen. But this will connect and makes communication between North America and Europe possible. And then by the time we get to the E paragraph, oil now becomes a coveted natural resource, as well as new chemical industries that start to emerge. And rather than the individual inventor, we're starting to see companies invest in these industrial research laboratories to replace the individual inventor so that they can patent, and keep those secrets and make money off of those secrets as best they can.
All right, so if we go back a little bit to when Todd started with Great Britain, he didn't talk about really what we tend to focus on a lot with industrialization, and that is the impact on people because of industrialization. So we have social effects, and we usually tend to focus on the negative social effects, and there were many. So we'll start with with working conditions. And so working conditions in the factories are really deplorable. People work long hours, often up to 18 hours per day, in conditions where there is poor light and little ventilation. So just really difficult and dangerous working conditions in the factories. In B, women and children are often preferred. Children were preferred because of their small hands that could reach into machinery, and women could would work for significantly lower wages than men. So children, particularly when they were in mines, they would have permanent spine deformation, having to walk stooped over. These mines had explosions or cave-ins that were an ever-present fear. So just really dangerous conditions. That some of the moving machinery would really hurt people. Women's hair, if it became undone, could get caught in the machinery. There's all kinds of problems. In C, we have laborers becoming sick and developing breathing and lung diseases from exposure to toxic substances. And as I said, they're sometimes injured, mutilated, and killed by the dangerous machinery. So at the initial part of the Industrial Revolution, there's nothing to protect these vulnerable populations. Next week, we do have one of our days we're talking about reform. So we will start to talk about how that changes over time. In D, when we get out of the factory, outside in the home, things are really not much better. Cities are incredibly overcrowded. Housing and sewage disposal cannot keep up with the population growth. As Todd said, we have these huge groups of people that are leaving. They have no work to do on the land. So they're entering cities, and cities are incredibly overcrowded. Diseases like cholera and dysentery, along with air and water pollution, really drastically reduce life expectancy. People are dying much younger, and the discrepancy between urban and rural life expectancy is significant here. Social problems such as alcoholism, prostitution, crime, and sanitation problems simply define life in these industrialized cities. And then in the F, it's important to say that there are some positive consequences, but for some groups, and we're really not talking so much about the workers here, and that the Industrial Revolution encourages a middle class, and that middle class is going to have some income to spend. So we will see them start to do things like buy homes and luxury items like china, furniture, and art, but we still have a wide discrepancy between the workers that are poor and the middle class citizens. So mostly negative effects from industrialization.
Great, thank you, Katie. Yeah, so that's going to help you a little bit with the DBQ for today, as a matter of fact, that Katie just left us with. So our key takeaways to talk about the context in which the Industrial Revolution originated and developed, and what factors influenced that development, how innovations and advances during Industrial Revolution led to economic and social change, and what were the causes and consequences of those social developments resulting from that. And so our reasoning development primarily was causation today. Okay, we're going to get straight into our DBQ exam practice, and we'll just unpack the rubric one more time for you. If you're joining us for the first time on this Friday, this is typically what we do. We unpack the rubric, then we go through the documents, and then we turn you loose and have you write for us. So here we go. The for the A category, it's thesis or claim. This is unchanged from the rubrics previously. You're going to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that must establish a line of reasoning. Okay, so that's really important there. The B category is contextualization, to describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. And so you want to bring the reader into the prompt with broader historical events, developments, or processes that occur before, during, or continue after the time frame of the question. The point is not awarded for merely a phrase or reference.
Okay, so in the C part of the rubric, we have evidence. And there are a few changes, as we've already talked about, from the typical rubric for 2020. And so if you see at the top there, the evidence from the documents, we have a possibility of 3 points that you can get from the documents. We have that first point, which is sort of a low bar point. You're going to use the content of at least 2 documents to address the topic of the prompt. We want to do better than that, of course, and move to the next second point, where what you're doing with two of the documents is supporting an argument in response to the prompt. So I want you to be very deliberate that when you're using your documents, that you are bringing them back to whatever your argument is that they are the evidence for. And then there is a third point in the rubric for 2020 where you're supporting an argument in response to the prompt using 4 out of the 5 documents that they're going to give you on this year's DBQ. So 3 possible points and evidence that come from the documents. If you move to the second half of the slide, you'll see this year there are 2 points for evidence beyond the documents. The rubric sounds exactly like it does on a normal year when there's only 1 point for this, but they've added additional points. So if you see, you're going to use at least 1 additional piece of specific historical evidence beyond that is found in the documents that is relevant to an argument about the prompt. And it must describe the evidence and use more than just a phrase or reference. There's no double dipping. You can't use what you've used for contextualization and the B point that Todd just told you about. So if you do this once, there's 1 point. And then for this year only, there's the possibility of a second point for doing this twice, a second piece of specific historical evidence. So 5 possible points in the C part of the rubric this year.
In the D category, it's one small change. So the D category is analysis and reasoning. And so the first part of the D category is sourcing. So because it's a 5 document DBQ, you will earn 1 point for 1 document that explains how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument. So we have been talking about the acronym HAP. I know some teachers use HIPPO, but historical situation, audience, purpose, point of view. That's when we talk about HAP. That's what we're talking about. And we say happy, it's because you have to explain how or why. So why is that relevant to the argument? So if you do that for 1 document out of the 5 that are possible, you earn 1 point in the D category. If you do it for a second document, the same type of sourcing activity, you can earn an additional point here. And then the final point in the D category is the complexity point. And this is unchanged. It demonstrates a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt. You can using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question. And they've given us 5 different bullet points that are 5 different ways that that can be done. Okay, so that is the D category of our rubric. All right, here is going to be our prompt. Evaluate whether or not the Industrial Revolution improved the lives of European workers. So because we have the task word evaluate, that means you have to look at the evidence that's going to be there in the DBQ and take a position. It did or it did not improve the lives of European workers. That's what we want you to do. Weigh the evidence, take a position, did or did not improve the lives of European workers.
And make sure you add a why, a because, right? You want to make sure you have a line of reasoning. So
Exactly.
as we go through the documents, we'll just go through them really quickly. This is the first source is Robert Southey. He's an English romantic poet. After visiting Manchester in 1807, Colloquies on the Progress and Prospects of Society, 1829.
Document 2 is from Thomas B. Mulcahy, a liberal member of parliament and a historian, and essays. He's going to respond to Southey's Colloquies in 1830. So document 1 is Southey, and document 2 is a response to Southey.
Document 3 is Flora Tristan, a French socialist and women's rights advocate. And this is her journal, her published journal in 1842. So think about what that might have to say.
Document 4 comes from William Alexander Abram, a journalist and historian. This is a journal article that appears in 1868. And again, he's going to be talking about a position. He's taking a position about the lives of workers.
And then, of course, you remember that one of the 5 documents you're going to get will be some kind of visual document. And here we have a visual that's the view from Blackfriars Bridge over the River Irwell. It's in The Graphic, which is a weekly magazine dealing with social issues in the 1870s. So we have this picture here, and you can look at that image and interpret what you think that's saying about the lives of European workers during this time.
Okay, we're going to move over to the document camera now and talk about our structure. So if you have some paper nearby, it'd be a good idea to get that out and have that ready to go. We've been going over possible structures for you. One of the things is that for the first time, it's an open note exam. So you think about what kind of things can I do to speed myself up and prepare. One of the things is you could have kind of a generic structure already made and ready laid out. You obviously won't know the prompt or anything else, but we can have our structure kind of figured out for us and have that laying aside as we get ready to go. All right, so here's our prompt. Evaluate whether the Industrial Revolution improved the lives of European workers. I've already made a T-chart, so I did improve or did not improve. And as I go through and read the documents, then I'm going to place on one side or the other, document 1 or document 2, whatever, so I can start my sort of the documents. Okay, and that little bit of organization will help you get started. When we start on our contextualization paragraph, we're going to begin broadly. So I always kind of start with a broad triangle that kind of flattens down to a point. And this will be our contextualization paragraph. Now, if you're struggling to get into how do I get into whether or not this improved the lives of European workers, remember, we've always talked about you can use GeoSprite as a tool to help you kind of get into that contextualization. And since we're talking about workers, certainly the social aspect could be used. We're talking about industrial revolution, so the technology aspect could be used. Those are two avenues. We could certainly get into the economics place, but for me in my head, doesn't mean it's necessarily the way you want to do it. These are two obvious ways to kind of build our way into contextualization. Okay. Before we end this big paragraph, we want to make our thesis or claim. Okay. That's what we want this to be. And that thesis or claim needs to have a because statement. Okay. This is what Katie has been teaching us all along. Because, and we have to have reason number 1 and reason number 2. Okay, and that can bring us over into our thesis. All right. Our 2 reasons then will be the topic sentences of our body paragraphs. Okay, so if reason number 1 is going to be here, we want to bring in a topic sentence that introduces that. And then we're going to start to see which documents are going to fit my position. And so I want to use 1 to 2 documents that support that reason. And I also then want to think about HAP 1 to 2 documents. And again, HAP is historical situation or audience or purpose or point of view. And then the why is that important. Okay. This all in this first paragraph. If we're keeping an eye on our outside evidence points in the D category, or excuse me, in the C category, well, then this is a chance to bring in some outside evidence as well, relevant to the prompt and our argument. Okay. Katie, you want to add anything there?
No, I think that's great. I want to remind there's a lot of students out there who have been submitting work that has all the letters of HAP in their paragraph, and that's not necessary. That's you don't have to do all that work, especially given the time constraints of the exam. But the why is really important. Just make sure you explain the relevance of whatever you're including in the HAP as to why it's relevant to your argument.
Really good. So just 1 of that. Next, our second reason. Okay, so reason number 2. Always begin with that topic sentence. And we want to use 1 or 2 documents here that help support or support the mini argument we're making with this topic sentence. And similarly, we want to HAP, that is historical situation, or audience, or purpose, or point of view, and why, one or two documents here. Okay, so you can see this kind of pattern. And again, because we're writing to a very specific task, to a very specific audience, we're going to take the time to kind of, block out this plan. I know it can seem a little cookie cutter, but really it's about this task that we're asked to do. If we're writing more as historians, certainly we could take a lot more avenues at getting at this. And then here is also a place where we can bring in our outside evidence if we're searching for that second outside evidence point. Okay. Once we get here, then you need to make a decision. And part of this decision is really going to be about watching your time. We have only 45 minutes to get this done. So where are you by the time we get to here and you can make a decision? You can, at this point, conclude your essay by restating the thesis or claim. And then I would suggest a little more context going forward. That kind of leads into the next era of history, because that's what good writers do. Okay, so that's one possibility. The other possibility could be that you can build a contextualization paragraph if you want. Again, it's going to depend on your time.
Complexity paragraph.
So with this contextualization paragraph, or excuse me, complexity paragraph, I apologize for that. You can build a possible complexity paragraph here if you have the time. And that's where you're going to take an alternative argument and use at least one doc. I'll put 1 to 2, but you want to use at least one doc. There's only 5 documents in the whole thing. Okay. If you have time, again, you could HAP that doc, historical situation, audience, purpose, point of view, and why, just in case one of these wasn't quite good enough and didn't cross the bar, then we're getting that second point. Haiti, do you want to add something here?
No, I think that's great. If you, if you have time and there's a piece of outside information for that document, you could do that as well. The outside evidence definitely can't be just a mere mention. So sometimes students mention it and think they've gotten the point for it. So if there's always a nice best practice to maybe add a third one if there's that possibility to do it and the time permits.
So there you go. You have kind of a basic structure to get you started as we think about writing this DBQ, this document-based question that deals with Industrial Revolution. Okay. Katie, you want to go over our task?
Right. Yeah. So again, here's our DBQ Friday. We're going to give you this full DBQ for you to work on. If it is located in the bottom of the YouTube video there, you might have to show more, and you'll see it in the description underneath the video. But now we're at the point where I think it's a really good idea to start thinking about your timing. And so time yourself. See how long this is taking you to do. We did quickly give you a sneak peek at the documents. So timing yourself as we're closing in on just over 2 weeks before the exam is probably a good idea. You can download the DBQ in the description. And then if you want, please, we encourage you to use that format structure that we suggest. But we definitely are not trying to say that whatever way that you have done this is the way that you have to. If your teacher has taught you another way, it's just a suggestion, having a lot of experience with reading these essays to give you some structure in case you're looking for that. We will feature different parts of students that have done this right and maybe some common mistakes on Monday. If you will please email us your responses at apeuro virtuallearning@gmail.com. Put your first name, your school, and your state or your country, and we will feature those on Monday. But this is a full 5-document DBQ for you to practice over this weekend and email us your responses. All right, so today we have some schools to shout out. Our first school is Vista Murrieta High School. We've had lots of students that have emailed us from Murrieta, California. They are the Broncos, so go Broncos. We have Lewiston High School in Lewiston, Maine. Again, some really great responses from students up in Maine. They are the Blue Devils. And last but not least, my good friend, Anna Maria at Westminster School in Atlanta, Georgia. Go Wildcats. It's a great, beautiful school there in Atlanta. So thank you guys for continuing to send us all of your excellent, excellent work. And we hope that you found the feedback helpful.
Just a quick note from College Board. We know that not all students have access to the internet or a device. We're working on solutions to help students get what they need to show their best work. If you need mobile tools or connectivity or know someone who does, reach out directly to College Board at cb.org/tech. Okay, Katie.
All right, I'm ready.
Look what I got going on here. It's the DBQ dance. It's Friday.
I was hoping.
Very exciting.
I was hoping that you were going to do the DBQ dance today, Todd.
It's a thing now, apparently.
All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a good weekend.
See you, buddy, everyone. Bye-bye.